all across America and around the world. This is Veterans Radio. This is Veterans Radio.
Welcome to Veterans Radio. I am Jim Fausone. I'm the officer of the deck today. We've got some great programs for you. I think you'll find very interesting. We always want to remind you can find more about Veterans Radio at its Facebook site or by going to veteransradio.net, where we're on the web 24/7. You can find a lot of our podcasts there as well. We post new ones every Tuesday, so you can get a new story, a new interview, something you didn't know before by going to veteransradio.net. And before we get started, we want to thank our sponsors. First up, we want to thank National Veteran Business Development Council, nvbdc.org. It was established to certify both service-disabled and veteran-owned businesses. You'll find out how they can help your business by going to nvbdc.org. We want to thank Legal Help for Veterans. Legal Help for Veterans fights for veterans' disability rights all across the nation. You can reach them at 800-693-4800 or on the web at legalhelpforveterans.com. We want to welcome to Veterans Radio today a Marine, author, journalist, Ben Kesling. Ben, welcome to Veterans Radio.
Jim, thanks very much for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, this is a great opportunity to talk with you, somebody who knows what they're talking about. As I said, you served in the Marine Corps. You did deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan. You graduated from Wabash College and picked up a Master of Divinity from Harvard University, and then interestingly attended also the renowned Northwestern University Journalism School. Mix all that together up, and you get a Wall Street Journal correspondent for the Midwest. How did you end up going from the Marine infantry to being a Wall Street Journal correspondent? Was there a plan there, or this is just what you do as it moves along?
I went to Wabash College for undergrad, and then, as you said, to Harvard Divinity School, and that was all before the Marine Corps. So, I was one of the few, if not the only, infantry officer I knew with a divinity degree. But then when I was getting out, I had the extreme both good luck and I guess some planning to go to Northwestern for journalism school and use the GI Bill, which I know a lot of veterans use when they get out. And it was I can't say enough for anybody who's transitioning to have access to the GI Bill. It's just a fantastic opportunity to go do something. I mean, do something that you maybe didn't plan on doing before. I don't think I could have afforded to do journalism school without the help of the GI Bill. It was at the end of my time in the Marine Corps, after some deployments to Iraq, Afghanistan, and some training stuff. I worked in embassies overseas, doing Marine Corps security guard work, and I was I became fascinated at all the different news outlets that I got to absorb while traveling through the Middle East, and seeing the way that news was presented, and realized, hey, I might have something to contribute here. So that's kind of how I ended up on that path.
Well, as you say, you do, because this is sort of the stew. You put all these things in and cook it up and see how it works. And in your instance, it's worked really well. It's led you, as I said, to the Wall Street Journal, where you're a correspondent. But it also led you to, hey, I have something to say about the deployments in Afghanistan, kind of both the deployments and what happens afterwards. And that's your new book, Bravo Company. Tell us, as you went into this project, kind of what got you started on it? What made you think that Bravo Company was something you should focus on?
Yeah, so the book Bravo Company, it's out November 1st from Abrams Press, and it's something I've been working on since 2019. And it's interesting. You asked me or said that my background and being in journalism led me to want to write this book. And oddly enough, I pushed back against writing the book for a while. So I started by writing a newspaper story for the Wall Street Journal, a feature about the men from Bravo Company. I was introduced to them, and through sort of the normal process of doing a feature, I wrote about them. And their story was, they had a harrowing deployment in 2009 to the Arghandab Valley in Afghanistan. Had some KIAs and a lot of wounded men. And they were wounded primarily by IEDs, very few firefights, a lot of hidden IEDs. So there was this constant anxiety and almost a terror of going out of the wire. Well, 10 years after that deployment, there had been a couple suicides with the veterans of the group, and some guys who were having some issues with coping with the memories of that deployment. So the Department of Veterans Affairs decided to launch a pilot program along with the Veteran Service Organization to bring all the men back together for a reunion. No cost to them. They all came back together so that they could find that camaraderie, that teamwork, that group identity that they had when they'd been in the Army. And they hoped, the VA and Veteran Service Organization hoped that by bringing those men together, they could have a way to stanch some of the bleeding, to stop the crisis that these men were in, or some of the men were in. And since that time, they've had no suicides in the group, and they've really stayed connected together. But that was my introduction to Bravo Company, was going to this event. And then my publisher contacted me, my editor and my publisher contacted me and said, "Hey, there's a book there." And I felt like I wasn't in a position to write a book about these men's story, because I mean, who are we to take on telling an entire company's story? So I pushed back on that for so long until I finally relented and said, "Okay, let's do it. Let's write this book." I think that all of my time in the Marine Corps, my decade of covering the Pentagon and covering the Department of Veterans Affairs, the Wall Street Journal, I think all of that colors this book and this narrative. And I don't tell it in the first person. I'm not in the book at all. It's all about Bravo Company. But I think that a lot of times we can best tell our own stories, or we can best inform other people's stories through our own experiences by telling their story as best we can and translating it. And I think that my experience as a Marine and all this time allowed me to help understand a little bit more about where these men were coming from, and to tell that story. So that was sort of the impetus behind the book Bravo Company.
And this is a really personal account for these men. You've interviewed them, you tell their individual stories, a lot of them. But yeah, I can feel the policy issues shifting around and impacting decisions that are made in this book, that are, right, or at least told in this book, whether it be you talk about mission shift, and how the best axe in the world is not a scalpel. And I thought that was a very appropriate discussion in there, and talking about sort of Obama's election and how that had to shift things from Iraq to Afghanistan. I mean, but the guts of this are the individuals. How many interviews did you do, and how did you get so personal with these guys?
I ended up having a few hundred hours of interviews with some of them in a Bravo Company, and I didn't talk to all of the men. And when you're undertaking a project like this, there's sort of a decision you have to make on how widely to spread your coverage and how deep to go with coverage. And I wish I could have spoken with everyone, but there's only so much time to do one of these projects. I spoke to a number of these men, and I dove really deep with them, and not only with them, but some of the people that were left behind after some of these men died in combat or died by their own hand after returning from Afghanistan. So I spoke to some of the dependents, spouses and whatnot. parents. But I think that the men from Bravo Company and those around them spoke to me because they wanted to make sure that their time in Afghanistan and really just the Afghan war generally was memorialized, was told in an effective and real way. And because of the way that that I wrote the Wall Street Journal story, being a Marine myself, and just over time talking to these men, I think that they, blessedly trusted me with telling their story.
That level of trust between the men and you as the author comes out in Bravo Company, because they reveal things, you reveal things in the book that these guys, the only way you would know it if they told it to you. And it wasn't always glorious, or, sometimes it was downright, disarming to their reputation. But they were so honest with you, and you broke the book up. It's not exactly thirds, but there's sort of this before section, right, deployment section, and afterwards section. And in that before section, you really dive into the men that you were able to talk to about, the characters they were before. Tell us how that process went for you to kind of see it in those three stages.
Right. When I started the book, when I started doing the research and reporting for the book, I thought, hey, okay, I need to set the stage and tell a little bit about these guys before their time in Afghanistan. And I also need to figure out why they were there, like what was the reason that Bravo Company was at that spot in the Argonne Valley in 2009 when they deployed. So I started going back and looking at their pre-deployment stuff, and just for anyone who doesn't know about the military and how it works with the pre-deployment and just what goes into a workup before people deploy, I thought it was an important thing to talk about the building of a team, right? And then when I started trying to figure out how these men ended up, and it's all men at the time because it was 2009, so it was all men in this infantry unit. When I started to talk about how these men ended up in Afghanistan, it took me into sort of way up into the 10,000 foot view to the inside the Beltway in Washington, D.C. to figure out what was the reason these deployments were happening the way they were. And it took me into the policy behind the new President Obama at the time, his forthcoming surge into Afghanistan, and all that gets unpacked in those pages. So, this is a book about men going to war and then returning from war. But as you've rightly pointed out, it's also a good way to look at what it's like to prepare to go to war, and the feelings, the training, the teamwork that comes from the moment you're in high school and looking at the Army, or signing those papers with the recruiter, to the time you leave. And it's a look at a snapshot of policy at the highest level, but done in a way that doesn't get bogged down in terminology and sort of a boring tale of politics. It's more of a quick moving look at how decisions get made or don't get made at the policy level, at the strategic level, and how those trickle down to men, individuals who end up walking through pomegranate groves in the middle of Afghanistan. So one of the goals with that was to make all that accessible, and for people who have no interest in picking up a book about the history of the Afghanistan war because it's too dry, they're not interested in it, whatever. The structure of this history and this policy discussion is such that it's available and accessible and moves quickly as part of a narrative of an Army unit in combat. And I think that was a very important thing. It's a very important thing to do to make that accessible to people.
Well, I think you also had to set the groundwork, and did it well, by talking about the men and where they came from, what type of men are joining up and finding themselves in this unit, in this company, because I think there's some preconceived notion about where they all come from, and this was their only choice in life, so this is what they ended up having to do, and that's not the case. But you also talk about how and anybody who's been in the military can really relate to this, is like, oh, we're preparing to send you to this country or that country or the desert or the polar ice cap. We're going to train for that, and all of a sudden the whole mission changes, and all that training, you wonder why.
Well, it's, I mean, one of the things that I talk about that, anybody who's been in knows is that a large bulk of the training for any deployment is sort of general training for any deployment, right? It's learning how, I mean, if you're on the outside thinking about how the Army or the Marine Corps or whomever gets ready to go on a deployment, you think, oh, there must be all this specialized training for the exact spot they're going. Well, no, a lot of it is just learning how to shoot your rifle alongside a number of other people, and to do it effectively and efficiently and as a team, and not shoot each other, right? Like, that's part of it. Or how to advance on an objective. There's all these things that are sort of general training objectives that you're going to do if you're going to Iraq, if you're going to Afghanistan, if you're going to the other side of the moon. And then you throw in some specialized training for the place where you're going, but at the end of the day, let's be honest, there isn't a whole lot of specialized training for the place that a conventional Army or Marine unit is going. It's generalized training, and then you apply that to the situation when you get there. But for these guys, for these Bravo Company guys, they'd been planning and told they were going to Iraq for deployment, and at the last moment they were switched gears and told, nope, you're going to Afghanistan instead. So part of the story is to be that men and now men and women in the military need to be trained in a way that they can switch gears quickly and go someplace else. But also there is still a need to know where you're going, to know what it is about that place that you need to apply specific lessons learned, and know where the heck you are in the world and among the people when you're operating overseas. And it's a constant balance, but it's also a constant sort of very Joseph Heller catch-22 aspect to getting ready to deploy and training up. It's both extraordinarily serious, and then there's this almost a bit of farcical aspect thrown into any military endeavor, and anybody who's a veteran will recognize that completely. The utter seriousness, and then that dash of almost unbelievable farce that's thrown in on top of it.
Well, and I want to talk about afterwards. As I said, there's before deployment and afterwards. The book's kind of broken into sections of, and the afterwards may be the most sobering part of this. And there are specific individuals like Lyle Presley, Jared Lemon, Rob Musel, who you tell their stories of afterwards, which are pretty moving. But as a Wall Street Journal correspondent, I expect you to be able to write well, which overcomes being a Marine. And you wrote about free-floating individuals with no physical bonds holding them together in this section on afterwards. Talk to us about the meaning you were communicating in that sentence.
Yeah. So I've been, as I've said, I've been covering the Pentagon and the Department of Veterans Affairs for the Wall Street Journal for about 10 years. So I've seen some of the policy that goes into this. And being a Marine myself and knowing others in the service, when you get out, we have all these discussions, and Congress has discussions, and you always hear about the VA this and VA that in news coverage and through whomever. And it's always, what are we doing for our veterans, and how are we helping them? And like, how do we help this person, this single person, whoever it is, our uncle or our aunt or our cousin or brother or whatever, how do we help them once they get out of the service? And what happens when you get out of uniform a lot of times is you become, as I say in the book, a free-floating individual, like a single molecule that's floating around out there in the system. And, anybody who's listening to this who knows a veteran or is a veteran themselves will probably identify with this, which is when a veteran who needs assistance in some way or wants to be a part of the system as a veteran, when they do what we expect them to do, when they go in and sign up and ask for help or ask for assistance, what happens to them is they are often seen as an individual who gets individual treatment from an individual doctor with individualized medicines or individualized programming, and they go through this system by themselves. But as they learned in the military, nobody can succeed as an individual in the military. You have to be part of a team. And when you get out, a lot of times that's what's missing for a lot of veterans, is the idea of having that team there around you. And so you have this free floating nature, and no man's an island. No woman is an island. We're all in this together, right? And part of the strength of this Bravo Company reunion that I cover in the newspaper, but I also write about in the book and talk about its impetus and where it comes from, part of that philosophy was to remember that we're not individuals, that we are members of a team, that we are our brother's keepers, and we have to recognize this sort of an unbearable weight, a debt that we take on when we wear that uniform to those people that are around us, to the men and women we serve with, that does not disappear when we take off that uniform. And a lot of times the depth of that debt, the reality and the weight of that debt doesn't come back around, and we don't really recognize it for a few years after we leave service. But then when we do, I hope that those who are listening to this recognize that there's a way to do good by that debt, to do good by those people with whom we served, and to reconnect and be part of that team again. It's so very important.
Yeah, that reconnecting, which is what that reunion did, changed them from being free-floating individuals to back to some sort of unit, cohesive in some ways, not as tight as before, but still recognizing that there's a unit structure there. We talked earlier about the trust these guys had to have in you to write at the depth that you were able to write on, and guys like Jared Lemon, who lost an arm, came back and really lost his professional life, got divorced, had to find his way into support from I think it was Ranger Road that he found. They really bared their souls and told you kind of how challenging the transition out post deployment was, and I think that's a good example of the level of trust they gave you. That's great news.
Yeah, and whenever you're writing something like this, or you're writing an account of veterans getting out of the military, the goal is never to have it be sort of, I feel like too often there can be a script, right? A script for what we expect of a veteran. A good guy, a good gal, whatever, they join the military, they go overseas, they see bad stuff, they have bad experiences, and they come home and they fall apart. Like, that's the script that we're kind of sold as to broken veterans. But having experiences that are traumatic doesn't necessarily lead to decay. It can lead to growth, but it leads to change no matter what. And one of the things that I really appreciate, the honesty with which the men from Bravo Company spoke with me about this stuff, was to be honest about the traumas that they faced in uniform and those that they faced when they came back and took off that uniform, but that those traumas aren't necessarily de facto in and of themselves bad. It's just life. And they bared their souls as far as telling me about where life was taking them. And I think that that's such an important thing for people outside of the military to know, and also for people who are in the military and have gotten out to be reminded that there isn't a script or a narrative that people have to be locked into, that we're just human beings who have gone through an abnormal experience, the abnormal experience of being close to or in combat. And that has caused irreparable change to our lives, just as anything else causes change. But it's something that we can leverage and learn from and grow with. And for people like Jared Lemon, who talked to me so much about his experience in the military and afterwards, I'm in awe of the ability to talk about life as such and to say, hey, this is just the way it is, and here's what I'm going through, and I'm going to tell you about it, and we'll see what happens on the other end of it. And I valued that the candidness with which they spoke with me so much.
Well, and that opportunity, the unexpected opportunity for growth is there, and that message comes through in the book, Bravo Company. I wanted to talk about another turn of phrase, Ben Kesling, that you used, because it's the erasure of identity that you comment on. And on the other side of erasing the old identity, I suppose, is this opportunity to grow into a new identity. Can you talk about that phrase a little?
Yeah. I mean, everybody in the military, I think I can speak confidently for about 99% of everyone in the military can't wait to get the hell out of the military, right? Like, you are waiting for that EAS to get out of there, and whether you're a PFC or, those generals are thinking it too. Like, is it worth it for me to stick around to try to get on their star, or I'm going to get out of here? And everybody wants to get out, right? Like, it's universal. But then that moment comes, and you take off the uniform, and you realize, man, there was something to that, and there was something incredible about all those awful experiences, and there was something incredible about all those great experiences I had while in uniform. And when you remove that uniform, there is an immediate loss of identity that occurs, even for somebody who they've got the world. When they get out, maybe they've got a great family, they got a great job lined up. They seem to have all their ducks in a row, but there's still a loss of identity that comes when that uniform is removed. And to recognize that, and to say to yourself, okay, I've lost that part of my identity, but that doesn't mean I've lost all of my identity. It just means I've moved again. Like, life happens. Life happens, man. And you move on to the next stage of your life. You become someone who has once worn the uniform. And I talked to some guys in the book who they took off that uniform voluntarily. They EAS, end of active service. They got out by their own choosing. And, boy, maybe that wasn't a great choice. Maybe I liked the Army a heck of a lot more than I gave it credit for. And I look back on it and say, I wish I would have stuck around a little bit longer. There's guys who got out because they were good and ready to get out. And you know what? They're glad they got out. But still, I mean, talk to any veteran, even those who were glad they've gotten out, and they still look back on it. And when they're being honest with you, they'll say, yeah, I miss it. I miss it every day.
Yep.
I'm not glad to see it go, but I still miss it. It's like a weird paradox.
I was glad I did it. I wouldn't want to do it again.
Yeah. Or I'm glad I did. I wish I were still doing it. No, I don't. And you vacillate. You switch between the two, right? And then there's also those guys who get injured, like Jared Lemon or Alex Haragi, who I talk about in the book, who lost his legs in Afghanistan, and he had the uniform taken away from him prematurely through that injury, and it's something that nothing you can do about it. Like, hey, it's time to get out of the military, but man, I miss it all the time. Even though it's the thing that took my legs away from me, it gave me so much other stuff. And there's really just all of these different variations and gradations of feeling, because there are all these gradations and variations of feeling in the human experience. And we need to recognize that as a society, and recognize that as people who once wore the uniform, that there's no black and white to this stuff. There's no way that you're supposed to feel. There's just the way you feel. And that there's a million different ways that you can feel about it.
And they're all
try to capture that.
Yeah, they're all individual stories, and you do capture that. Actually, you have one of the most relating conversations with Rob Musil, one of the most irreverent views of the Medal of Honor I've ever read, because it's normally written on in such hushed tones. But these are all individual stories. These are all individual guys bearing their truth to you, and it's being captured.
Yeah, and I just tried to. I tried to talk about some of these things, that the Medal of Honor section. I tried to take something that's so it's so holy in a way, right, and so important. And when something is that holy and important, it's just as important to talk about it as a thing that exists in this world that human beings are involved with. It's not something up on a pedestal. I guess it is something up on a pedestal in a way, but it's not something that's removed from human experience. And human experience, again, has all facets and manners to it. And I very much like that section that you mentioned, where I talk about sort of have a musing on the Medal of Honor and what it means, where it comes from, what men and women in uniform think about it. And it does sort of take, there's no way to say, a bit of an irreverent view of the way people think about something that we're never allowed to take an irreverent view of. And I know that hearing about it in this discussion is probably makes it sound as if I'm trying to denigrate this thing, and in no way I am. In fact, I think by talking about it and by adding these different facets to it and showing all the different ways to look at something, it actually deepens the respect for something like the Medal of Honor, and deepens the appreciation for what's involved in the sacrifice that's made to when that medal is awarded to someone.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great book, Ben Kesling. Thanks for taking the time to talk to Veterans Radio today on Bravo Company and Afghanistan deployment and its aftermath. It'll be out with Abrams Press in November of 2022. It's a very good read. You can tell how much time and effort went into it, and that this Marine is a wordsmith as well. So there's both purpose and meaning in the book, and we'd encourage folks to get it. Ben, if they want to follow some of your other writings, how do they keep track of you?
So I'm on Twitter at B Kesling, BKESLING, and you can pick up a copy of the Wall Street Journal. I'm a staff reporter for the Wall Street Journal and writing about the Midwest, veterans, and defense issues regularly. Thanks for spending time with us today on Veterans Radio. I appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
And I want to thank everybody for listening to Veterans Radio today. I am Jim Fausone. It's been a pleasure to be your host. I'm a veterans disability lawyer at Legal Help for Veterans, and you can reach us at 800-693-4800 or legalhelpforveterans.com on the web. You can follow Veterans Radio on Facebook and listen to its podcasts and internet radio shows by going to veteransradio.net. And until next time, you are dismissed.
If you have a VA claim denied by the Board of Veterans' Appeals, contact Legal Help for Veterans at 1-800-693-4800. They're experts in handling cases before the U.S. Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims. Their number again, 1-800-693-4800.
We again want to thank our national sponsors, the National Veterans Business Development Council, NVBDC.org, VA Ann Arbor Health Care System, the Vietnam Veterans of America Charles S. Kettles Chapter, Ann Arbor, Michigan, VFW Graf O'Hara Post 423 in Ann Arbor, and the American Legion Press Corn Post 46, also in Ann Arbor. We appreciate all your support. You can go to veteransradio.net, click on the sponsor level, and continue to support keeping Veterans Radio on the air. And until next time, you are dismissed.
With the Lucky Land Slots, you can get lucky just about anywhere. This is your captain speaking. We've got clear runway and the weather's fine, but we're just going to circle up here a while and get lucky. No, nothing like that. It's just these cash prizes add up quick. So I suggest you sit back, keep your tray table upright, and start getting lucky.
Play for free at LuckyLandSlots.com. Are you feeling lucky? No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+ terms and conditions apply. See website for details.